Most people spend their entire lives searching for God outside themselves, praying to a distant deity, begging for intervention from somewhere beyond the clouds. Joel Goldsmith discovered something that shattered everything religious institutions taught him, a truth so powerful it transformed thousands of lives. What if the very act of seeking God keeps you separated from the divine presence you already are? This isn't blasphemy. This is the mystical truth Jesus himself lived and taught, but the church concealed for centuries. The moment you stop seeking and start recognizing, everything changes in your spiritual life. Not gradually over years, not eventually after more practices, but in the instant of realization. Your prayers shift from begging to knowing, from requesting to recognizing what already is. Goldsmith called this the principle of identity, the cornerstone of mystical Christianity that transforms desperate seekers into empowered knowers of truth. You've been taught to reach upward for God when God has always been reaching through you as your very consciousness, your awareness, your existence itself. The divine isn't distant. It's the presence reading these words right now, aware of this exact moment. Today you'll discover why your prayers haven't worked the way you hoped, why spiritual practices feel exhausting rather than liberating, and what happens when you shift from seeking divine intervention to recognizing divine identity. This isn't about becoming God through effort or achievement. It's about recognizing what has always been true beneath the illusion of separation. The search ends today, and your real spiritual life begins now. Joel Goldsmith spent decades as a spiritual healer before this realization transformed his entire practice and revolutionized his understanding of prayer. He noticed something remarkable in his healing work that contradicted everything he'd been taught in traditional spiritual circles. His most powerful healings happened not when he prayed harder or longer, but when he stopped praying altogether and simply recognized the truth of divine presence already being there. The divine presence wasn't something he needed to summon through rituals or attract through worthy behavior. It was the very consciousness witnessing the situation, the awareness observing the need, the intelligence already present in every cell and circumstance. This recognition didn't come from books or teachers. It came from paying attention to what actually produced healing results versus what religion taught should work. This revelation came from Jesus' most misunderstood teaching that the church either ignored or twisted beyond recognition. When Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," he wasn't claiming unique divinity reserved only for himself as the Son of God. He was revealing universal truth available to every human being, the mystical reality that consciousness itself is divine, that awareness itself is God experiencing creation through infinite perspectives. The Father, infinite consciousness, divine presence, doesn't exist separate from you somewhere in heaven beyond the stars. It exists as the I Am awareness that reads these words right now, that breathes your breath without your permission, that beats your heart without your conscious effort. You are not separate from this intelligence. You are how this intelligence experiences being human, being individual, being you in this exact moment. When you pray to God as something separate from yourself, you unconsciously reinforce the illusion of separation that causes all your spiritual suffering. You confirm the belief that you're disconnected from divine presence, that God exists somewhere else requiring you to bridge an impossible gap. Goldsmith discovered this was the fundamental error, keeping sincere spiritual seekers trapped in exhausting cycles of seeking, finding temporary relief, then seeking again desperately. The spiritual life becomes an endless pursuit rather than a peaceful recognition of what already is and always has been. You accumulate practices, techniques, teachers, and books, hoping the next one will finally connect you to the God you believe exists somewhere beyond your reach. But each new practice confirms the same error, the assumption that you're separated from what you seek, that divine presence is something you lack rather than something you are. The shift happens when you stop all the seeking and ask yourself a completely different question that changes everything. Not where is God or how do I reach God, but what is aware of this moment right now? What consciousness is reading these words, breathing this breath, thinking these thoughts? That awareness, that consciousness, that knowing presence witnessing your experience. That's not seeking God, because that is the divine expressing itself as your individual experience. You don't have God like a possession you can gain or lose. You don't reach God like a destination after sufficient spiritual travel. You are the way infinite consciousness knows itself in this particular form, in this specific lifetime, through these unique circumstances. The ocean doesn't seek water, the wave doesn't search for the ocean, and consciousness doesn't look for itself outside itself, because only consciousness exists, expressing as everything you see and experience. This sounds radical and even dangerous to religious thinking because institutions built entire empires on your sense of separation from the divine. They needed you to believe in distance, in unworthiness, in your fundamental disconnection from God, requiring their rituals, their priests, their interventions to bridge the gap. Your spiritual dependence became their power. Your sense of separation became their authority over your relationship with the divine. But mystical Christianity, the inner teachings Jesus gave to close disciples, reveals what the church concealed to maintain control over the masses. Your very existence is proof of divine presence active and alive right now, not evidence of separation from God. Only God exists in mystical understanding. Only consciousness is real. Only infinite intelligence animates all creation, including the body you call yours and the thoughts you claim as your thinking. Joel Goldsmith taught that the moment you recognize I and the Father are one as present truth, not future achievement, everything in your experience begins to reorganize around this recognition. Problems don't disappear instantly like magic, but your relationship to them transforms completely when you stop begging God to fix them and start recognizing God as the intelligence already present within them, already knowing the solution, already being the harmony you seek. The question isn't, how do I get God to help me? Because that question assumes separation and distance. The real question becomes, how do I recognize the divine intelligence already present here, already operating, already being the only power and presence? This shift from seeking to recognizing is the mystical secret that changes everything, and you're about to discover exactly how to make this shift in practical ways that transform your daily life. Amanda was a devoted churchgoer who prayed daily for relief from chronic anxiety that had controlled her life for 15 years. She attended services, volunteered, followed every religious prescription, yet the anxiety persisted and sometimes worsened. She prayed harder, assuming her unworthiness or insufficient faith caused God to withhold healing. The more she sought divine intervention, the more separated from peace she felt. Then Amanda discovered Goldsmith's teachings, and everything shifted, not immediately but gradually, over several weeks of practice. Instead of praying for God to remove her anxiety, she began recognizing that the awareness observing her anxiety was already peaceful, already whole, already untouched by the mental storm. The consciousness witnessing her anxious thoughts wasn't anxious itself. It was the still presence watching thoughts come and go like clouds across a clear sky. She practiced this recognition daily, sometimes for just 30 seconds during anxiety episodes. What is aware of this anxiety right now? That question shifted her attention from the anxiety to the awareness itself. Within 3 weeks, she noticed the anxiety losing its power over her, not because it disappeared completely, but because she recognized something deeper than anxiety, the divine consciousness that remained peaceful regardless of mental weather patterns. After 2 months of this practice, Amanda's anxiety reduced by about 60% according to her journal tracking. More importantly, her relationship to the remaining anxiety transformed completely. She no longer feared it, fought it, or begged God to remove it. She recognized the peaceful awareness that remained untouched by it, and that recognition itself became her healing, her freedom, her reconnection to the divine presence she'd been seeking outside herself all along. Robert struggled with a failing business that brought him to the edge of bankruptcy after 20 years of entrepreneurial success. He prayed desperately for God to send customers, to change circumstances, to intervene and save everything he'd built. Each day without improvement felt like evidence that God either didn't care or was punishing him for some unknown transgression. His spiritual life became consumed with bargaining and begging. When Robert encountered Goldsmith's principle of recognition, it initially seemed impractical for concrete business problems. How could recognizing divine identity pay his debts or bring customers through his doors? But desperation made him willing to try something different. Instead of praying for business improvement, he began recognizing divine intelligence as the only mind operating, the only presence active in his business, his customers, and every circumstance. This practice felt strange at first, almost like giving up rather than taking spiritual action for change. But Robert committed to it for 30 days, spending 10 minutes each morning recognizing infinite intelligence as the only power present, already knowing what needed to happen, already orchestrating harmony. He stopped trying to manipulate outcomes through prayer and started resting in recognition of consciousness already being there, already operating perfectly. The shift took about 6 weeks to manifest in visible ways, much longer than he hoped for instant miracles. New customers appeared through unexpected referrals, a former client returned with a substantial project, and creative solutions to financial problems emerged from what seemed like nowhere. Robert's business didn't transform overnight, but over 4 months it stabilized and then began growing again, not through divine intervention from outside, but through recognition of divine intelligence already present, already operating, already being the only mind in business. Nicole faced a devastating health diagnosis that doctors said would require aggressive treatment with uncertain outcomes. She'd always been spiritual, praying regularly and believing in God's power to heal. But this diagnosis shook her faith because her prayers seemed to hit a wall, bouncing back without the divine response she desperately needed. Why wasn't God answering when she needed intervention most? The silence felt like abandonment. A friend introduced her to Joel Goldsmith's recordings, and one sentence stopped her completely. God doesn't heal sickness because God doesn't know sickness. God only knows its own perfect being. This wasn't the comfort she wanted. It was something far more challenging and ultimately more powerful. If she stopped asking God to heal sickness and started recognizing God as the only presence where sickness appeared to be, what would happen? Nicole began a practice that felt counterintuitive while facing serious illness. Instead of praying for healing, she spent time recognizing the infinite intelligence operating every cell, the consciousness present as her body's deepest wisdom, the divine presence that was her actual identity beneath the diagnosis. She didn't deny medical reality or refuse treatment. She recognized something deeper than the medical story, the spiritual truth of wholeness already present. Over 8 months, combining medical treatment with this spiritual recognition, Nicole's condition improved beyond what doctors expected. They credited the treatment, and she didn't argue, but she knew something else had shifted, her entire understanding of where healing comes from. Not from begging a distant God, but from recognizing the divine intelligence already present as her being, already knowing only wholeness, already expressing as the body's innate wisdom. She still receives medical monitoring, but fear no longer controls her. Recognition does. These 3 stories reveal a pattern that Joel Goldsmith observed throughout decades of spiritual healing work. The shift from seeking divine intervention to recognizing divine presence doesn't produce instant miracles, but it does produce consistent transformation over weeks and months. Amanda's anxiety, Robert's business, Nicole's health, each transformed not through desperate prayers, but through recognition of what already is. The divine consciousness already present, already operating, already being the only power. What makes this different from positive thinking or visualization? Recognition isn't mental effort trying to create reality. It's conscious awareness of reality already present beneath appearances. You're not trying to become divine, you're recognizing the divinity that breathes your breath, beats your heart, and remains as the consciousness witnessing every experience. This recognition doesn't require belief or faith. It requires attention, awareness directed to what's already here, already functioning. The transformation happens gradually because years of separation thinking don't dissolve overnight. You've spent your lifetime believing you're separate from God, that divine presence exists somewhere else, that you need intervention from beyond yourself. This conditioning runs deep, so the recognition practice needs consistency, daily attention to truth that consciousness itself is divine, that awareness itself is God experiencing being you right now. If these transformation stories inspire you to explore recognition over seeking, like this video to help others discover these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment which story resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey right now. Now let's explore the practical technique Goldsmith taught for shifting from seeking to recognition in your daily life. This isn't complicated, but it does require conscious practice until recognition becomes more natural than seeking. The fundamental practice involves 3 simple steps you can use anywhere, anytime, in any circumstance that tempts you to pray for divine intervention from outside yourself, instead of recognizing divine presence already here. First, pause whatever anxious thinking or desperate praying is happening and simply notice that you're aware. Don't try to change anything yet. Just recognize that consciousness is present, that awareness exists, that something in you knows you're reading these words right now. This awareness, this knowing presence, this consciousness that observes everything, including your thoughts and feelings. That's the first recognition. Something deeper than circumstances witnesses them without being touched or changed by them. Second, ask yourself this specific question that shifts everything. What is this awareness I'm experiencing right now? Not who am I, which keeps you identified with your personal story and history. But what is this consciousness, this knowing presence, this awareness that remains constant while everything else changes? Goldsmith taught that this awareness isn't personal. It's the infinite consciousness experiencing itself as your individual perspective, God knowing itself through these specific eyes. Third, rest in recognition rather than returning to seeking or problem solving. You don't need to understand this intellectually or figure it out mentally. You simply recognize that consciousness is present, awareness exists, and this presence is what the mystics called God, what Jesus called the Father, what Goldsmith called infinite intelligence. Just rest there for 30 seconds, 1 minute, however long feels natural, recognizing divine presence as the awareness you're experiencing right now, not somewhere else. Goldsmith taught a second powerful technique he called impersonalization that helps break the habit of seeing problems as yours, requiring your effort to fix. When something appears wrong, your health, finances, relationships, whatever, the automatic response is making it personal. My problem, my challenge, my responsibility to fix through prayer or action. This personalization actually blocks recognition of divine intelligence already operating, because you've claimed ownership of something that doesn't belong to personal you. Impersonalization means recognizing that what appears as your problem isn't actually yours. It's an impersonal appearance in consciousness, like clouds appearing in sky. The sky doesn't own the clouds, doesn't fight them or fear them, simply allows them to pass through. Similarly, divine consciousness doesn't own problems, doesn't struggle against appearances, remains as the infinite presence, allowing all experiences to move through without being touched or changed by them. When facing challenges, practice saying this inwardly. This isn't mine. This is an impersonal appearance in consciousness. An infinite intelligence is already present here, knowing only wholeness. You're not denying the appearance or pretending nothing's wrong. You're refusing to personalize it, to claim it as yours, to make it about separated you needing to fix it. This shifts responsibility from personal struggling to divine intelligence already present, already handling it, already being the only power operating. This practice takes several weeks to feel natural because personalization runs so deep in human thinking. You've been trained since childhood to take personal ownership of everything, problems and successes. But impersonalization liberates you from the exhausting burden of fixing everything through personal effort. You recognize consciousness itself as the operator, the handler, the presence that already knows what needs to happen and how harmony already exists beneath temporary appearances of discord. The third technique Goldsmith emphasized is what he called the secret of secrets in mystical Christianity. Recognizing I am as the divine name, not your personal name or human identity. When Moses asked God's name at the burning bush, the answer wasn't a personal name like those belonging to pagan deities. The answer was, I am that I am, existence itself, consciousness itself, the eternal present tense of being itself without qualities, descriptions, or limitations. Every time you say, I am followed by anything, you're using the divine creative power, the name of God, expressing as your experience. I am sick. I am broke. I am afraid. These aren't just descriptions. They're creative statements using divine power to confirm and perpetuate conditions. I am healthy. I am abundant. I am peaceful. These are better but still personal claims trying to use divine power for personal improvement, which isn't recognition, it's seeking. The mystical practice is recognizing I am, without adding anything. Just the pure awareness of existence itself. Consciousness aware of being conscious. Not I am this or that, not I am good or bad, just the recognition that I am, that existence is, that consciousness aware of itself is the divine presence Jesus called Father. When you rest in I am without additions, you recognize your true identity as consciousness itself, not as the personal story consciousness appears to experience. Practice this daily for at least 5 minutes, ideally longer as it becomes comfortable. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and simply recognize I am. The awareness that you exist, that consciousness is present, that being is. Don't add qualities or descriptions. Don't make it personal or special. Just rest in the recognition of existence itself, awareness itself, the divine presence that has always been your true identity beneath every human experience and appearance. These 3 techniques work together, creating a complete shift from seeking to recognition over time. When challenges arise, you pause and notice awareness is present. That's recognition. You impersonalize the challenge, refusing to claim it as yours, recognizing it as an appearance in consciousness. That's liberation from personal burden. Then you rest in I am, the divine identity beneath all appearances, and that's the secret that transforms everything. Goldsmith emphasized that these aren't mental tricks or psychological techniques. They're consciousness recognizing itself as divine. You're not trying to change consciousness or improve it. You're recognizing what consciousness already is, what it's always been, what it can never stop being. Infinite, whole, complete, lacking nothing, needing nothing, being the only presence and power regardless of what appears to be happening in the world of form and circumstance. This practice doesn't make problems disappear instantly like switching off lights. Sometimes challenges dissolve quickly. Sometimes they transform gradually over weeks or months. Sometimes they remain, but your relationship to them changes so completely, they no longer disturb your peace. The goal isn't manipulating circumstances. It's recognizing the consciousness that remains whole, regardless of circumstances, the divine presence that watches the human story without being limited or defined by it. Start with just 5 minutes daily practicing these recognitions. Notice awareness is present. Impersonalize whatever concerns you. Rest in I am without additions. Over time, perhaps 2 to 3 months of consistent practice, this recognition becomes more natural than seeking, more automatic than praying for intervention. You've shifted from being a separated seeker to being consciousness recognizing itself as divine, and that shift changes everything about your spiritual life. But let's be honest about the obstacles you'll face practicing recognition instead of seeking. The first and biggest challenge is that recognition feels like doing nothing, like giving up, like spiritual laziness compared to active prayer and petition. Your mind, trained for decades in seeking and striving, will scream that you need to do something, pray harder, take action, fix the problem. Recognition feels passive when you're conditioned to believe spiritual progress requires effort. This obstacle appears strongest during crisis moments when fear demands immediate action. Your child is sick, your bank account is empty, your relationship is crumbling, and someone tells you to just recognize divine presence. That feels insane, irresponsible, like spiritual bypassing of real problems, needing real solutions. Everything in you wants to pray desperately, beg God for intervention, do something that feels like meaningful spiritual action. The way through this obstacle is understanding that recognition isn't passive. It's the most powerful action possible because it aligns you with infinite intelligence already operating. You're not doing nothing. You're stopping the human interference that blocks divine wisdom from expressing. Your desperate prayers, anxious efforts, and fearful controlling actually prevent you from seeing and receiving the harmony that consciousness already knows and is. Give yourself permission to feel the fear, acknowledge the discomfort, and practice recognition anyway, even when it feels wrong. Start with smaller challenges, not life or death crises, to build trust in recognition. When you see results over time, When you experience the shift that comes from resting in divine presence rather than seeking it, the practice becomes easier during bigger challenges. Trust builds gradually, not instantly. The second major obstacle is doubt that shows up as internal questions undermining your practice. Is this real, or am I just making it up? Is recognition actual spirituality or psychological self-delusion? Does consciousness really care about my individual problems? These doubts are natural, even healthy, because blind belief isn't the goal, conscious recognition is. But doubt becomes an obstacle when it stops you from practicing long enough to experience results. Goldsmith faced this himself during his early years of spiritual healing work. He'd practice recognition, sometimes see results, then doubt would creep in, suggesting coincidence or placebo effects explained everything. The doubt was particularly strong when recognition didn't produce immediate visible changes. If consciousness is divine and I'm recognizing it, why isn't everything perfect right now? That question haunted him until he understood something crucial about how consciousness operates. Divine consciousness doesn't conform to human timelines or expectations. It operates according to its own perfect wisdom. Sometimes recognition produces instant shifts, sometimes gradual transformation over months. Sometimes the shift is internal rather than external. Your job isn't evaluating whether it's working according to your timeline. Your job is practicing recognition regardless of immediate results, trusting that consciousness knows what needs to happen and when. The way through doubt is continuing practice despite doubt, not waiting for doubt to disappear before practicing. Doubt and recognition can coexist. One is human mind questioning. The other is consciousness knowing itself. Let the doubt be there. Don't fight it or try to overcome it, but don't let it stop your practice either. Over time, as you accumulate experiences of transformation through recognition, doubt naturally weakens without you needing to battle it directly. The third obstacle is what Goldsmith called the tyranny of the senses. The overwhelming evidence your physical senses provide that problems are real, conditions are bad, and separation is the actual truth. Your bank account shows real numbers, your body shows real symptoms, your relationships show real conflict. How do you recognize divine wholeness when your senses scream the opposite message constantly? This obstacle trips up even advanced spiritual students because sensory evidence feels more real than spiritual recognition. You can recognize divine presence for 10 minutes, then open your eyes and see the same problems still there, seemingly unchanged, and the whole recognition practice feels like fantasy. The senses provide constant contradiction to spiritual truth, and human conditioning trusts senses more than consciousness. Goldsmith taught that you're not denying sensory evidence or pretending nothing's wrong. You're recognizing something deeper than the senses perceive, the consciousness that witnesses sensory information without being limited by it. The wave sees other waves and believes separation is real, but the ocean knows all waves are itself. There's no actual separation, just different forms of the same water. You're learning to see from the ocean's perspective, not denying waves exist. The practice is accepting what senses report without giving it final authority over spiritual truth. Yes, the bank account shows this number, and consciousness knows infinite supply. Yes, the body shows this symptom, and consciousness knows only wholeness. Both can be true simultaneously at different levels, and you're learning to live from the deeper truth while dealing practically with surface appearances. This takes time, usually several months of practice before it feels natural. The fourth obstacle, perhaps the most insidious, is spiritual impatience that wants instant transformation and judges the practice as failing when results don't appear immediately. You practice recognition for a week or two, see no dramatic changes, and conclude either you're doing it wrong or the teaching doesn't work. This impatience kills more spiritual practices than any other obstacle because modern culture conditioned you for instant results. Goldsmith emphasized repeatedly that consciousness recognition is a practice, not a magic formula. You're undoing decades of separation thinking, years of habitual seeking and striving, a lifetime of believing you're disconnected from divine presence. This conditioning doesn't dissolve because you recognize truth once or twice. It dissolves gradually as recognition becomes your new habitual response to life, replacing seeking as your automatic spiritual posture. Think about learning any skill, playing piano, speaking a language, mastering a sport. Nobody expects instant mastery. Everyone understands practice over time produces results. Spiritual recognition is no different. It's learning to see from consciousness rather than from separated ego. Learning to rest in divine presence rather than seeking it desperately. Give yourself at least 3 months of daily practice before evaluating whether it works. The transformation happens so gradually you might not notice it day to day. But compare yourself 3 months into practice with yourself now, and the shift becomes obvious. You respond to challenges differently, rest in peace more naturally, trust divine intelligence more readily, and seek intervention less desperately. That's the evidence recognition works, not dramatic instant miracles, but steady transformation of how you experience and navigate life. If these obstacle-breaking techniques give you hope for your spiritual practice, like this video to support the content, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment which obstacle you're ready to face and overcome now. Now let's explore advanced application of recognition in specific life areas where seeking usually dominates. Start with health, because physical problems trigger the most desperate seeking for divine intervention. When symptoms appear, the automatic response is praying for God to heal you, to remove the problem, to intervene in your body. This confirms separation, the belief that divine presence is somewhere else needing to reach into your body and fix it. Advanced recognition for health starts with acknowledging divine intelligence already operates every cell in your body right now. Your heart beats, your lungs breathe, your wounds heal, your immune system functions, all without your conscious direction. What intelligence does all this? Not your personal mind, not human effort, but consciousness itself, divine presence expressing as the body's innate wisdom. This intelligence isn't absent needing to arrive, it's always present, always operating, always being the only power. Instead of praying for healing, practice recognizing this divine intelligence as the only presence in your body right now. Not trying to make it true, recognizing what already is. Spend 5 to 10 minutes daily in this recognition, not seeking healing, just acknowledging consciousness as the intelligence operating every bodily function. This isn't denial of symptoms. It's recognition of something deeper than symptoms. The presence that knows only wholeness. William struggled with chronic pain for 7 years before discovering this practice. He'd prayed desperately for healing, tried every treatment, begged God to take the pain away. Nothing worked until he stopped seeking healing and started recognizing divine intelligence as the only presence in his body. Over 4 months, not overnight, the pain reduced gradually until it became manageable background rather than debilitating foreground. He still has some pain, but his relationship to it transformed through recognition of consciousness already present, already whole. Apply recognition to finances by understanding that abundance isn't something you lack needing God to send it. Abundance is the nature of consciousness itself, infinite by definition, limited by nothing, lacking nothing. The universe doesn't run out of energy, space, or creative possibility. Consciousness expressing as creation is inherently abundant, eternally generative, constantly creating without depletion. This isn't metaphor, it's the actual nature of existence itself. Your financial challenges appear because of limited thinking, not because consciousness lacks abundance. You've been trained to see scarcity, to believe in limitation, to think from personal separated mind rather than from infinite consciousness. Recognition practice for finances isn't begging God for money. It's recognizing the infinite nature of consciousness itself, the abundance that already is, the supply that never runs out because consciousness creates from itself, not from limited external resources. Practice this daily, especially when fear about money arises. Recognize that consciousness is infinite. Abundance is its nature, and this same consciousness is what you are, not what you have or lack. You're not trying to attract abundance from outside. You're recognizing abundance as the inherent nature of the consciousness that's reading these words, thinking these thoughts, experiencing this life. The shift is from seeking supply to recognizing the infinite source you already are. Brian faced bankruptcy and practiced this recognition for 6 months before seeing dramatic changes. He didn't deny his debt or ignore practical responsibilities, but he stopped panicking, stopped begging God for money, and started recognizing consciousness as inherently abundant. Opportunities appeared that seemed like coincidence. Ideas emerged that led to income. Doors opened that had been closed. After 8 months, his financial situation turned around, not through miracle, but through recognition aligning him with the abundance that consciousness already is. Apply recognition to relationships by understanding that divine love isn't something you need more of, it's what consciousness is. Love isn't an emotion that comes and goes, it's the very nature of consciousness itself, the intelligence that connects all apparent separate beings. The presence that knows no actual separation exists anywhere. When you recognize this, relationships transform because you stop seeking love from others and start recognizing love as what you are. The problem in relationships isn't lack of love, it's the belief in separation. You see yourself as separate from others, they see themselves as separate from you. And this illusion of separation creates all conflict, all pain, all relationship struggles. Recognition practice dissolves separation, not by changing the other person, but by recognizing consciousness as the one presence expressing as all apparently separate individuals. There's no actual separation, just consciousness knowing itself through infinite perspectives. When relationship challenges appear, instead of praying for God to change the other person or fix the situation, recognize consciousness as the only presence in both of you, not two separate beings in conflict, but one consciousness experiencing itself through two perspectives. This recognition doesn't make you doormat or deny legitimate boundaries. It shifts your fundamental understanding from separation to wholeness, from conflict to recognition of underlying unity. Catherine and her sister hadn't spoken in 5 years after a bitter argument. Catherine prayed for reconciliation, begged God to soften her sister's heart, tried everything to fix it. Nothing worked until she stopped seeking change and started recognizing consciousness as the only presence in both of them. She didn't contact her sister or force anything, just held this recognition daily for 2 months. Then her sister called unexpectedly, ready to talk, ready to heal. The recognition created shift neither could explain rationally. The most advanced application is recognizing consciousness in situations that seem evil, wrong, or unjust. This is where recognition practice meets its greatest test, because everything in you wants to fight against injustice, to pray for God to intervene and fix what's wrong. But Goldsmith taught that even here, especially here, recognition is the most powerful response because fighting confirms the power you're fighting against, while recognition reveals only one power exists, consciousness itself. This doesn't mean accepting injustice or becoming passive about wrong. Jesus overturned tables in the temple, confronted hypocrisy, took bold action against corruption. But he did it from recognition of divine presence as the only power, not from fear that evil had real power needing to be fought. Recognize consciousness as the only presence even where evil appears, and your actions come from wisdom rather than fear, from power rather than panic. When you see injustice, suffering, or evil in the world, your recognition practice is acknowledging that consciousness doesn't know evil, doesn't create it, doesn't empower it. Evil is the absence of consciousness, like darkness is the absence of light. You don't fight darkness, you turn on the light. You don't empower evil through fear and resistance, you recognize consciousness as the only actual power present, and that recognition itself brings light to darkness. This practice takes spiritual maturity because it's easily misunderstood as bypassing, as denying real problems, as spiritual privilege ignoring suffering. It's none of those things when practiced correctly. It's recognizing the deepest truth that only consciousness exists, only divine presence is real power, and everything else is temporary appearance lacking actual substance or permanence. From this recognition, you act with wisdom, compassion, and effectiveness, rather than from fear, panic, or despair. After months of practicing recognition over seeking, something profound shifts in your entire spiritual life. Prayer stops being desperate petition and becomes peaceful recognition. You're not begging anymore, you're acknowledging. You're not seeking anymore, you're resting. You're not trying to reach God anymore, you're recognizing God as the consciousness reading these words, breathing this breath, experiencing this moment right now. This shift doesn't mean you stop praying. It means your prayer transforms completely. Instead of asking God to change circumstances, you recognize God as the only presence in circumstances. Instead of requesting divine intervention, You acknowledge divine intelligence already operating perfectly. Instead of seeking God's will, you recognize God's will as the consciousness unfolding this exact moment, knowing what needs to happen, orchestrating harmony you can't see yet. The peace that comes from this recognition isn't the absence of challenges, it's the presence of something deeper than challenges. Consciousness remains whole regardless of what appears to be happening. You're not trying to be peaceful. You're recognizing the peace that already is beneath surface turbulence. Like the ocean floor remains still regardless of waves on the surface, consciousness remains whole regardless of appearances in the world of form. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives." The world gives temporary peace dependent on circumstances being favorable. Divine peace is the recognition that consciousness itself is peace, unchanging and untouchable regardless of circumstances. You access this not by seeking it from outside yourself, but by recognizing it as what you already are beneath every human experience and appearance. Your relationship to yourself transforms when you stop seeing yourself as separated human seeking divine connection. You recognize yourself as consciousness expressing as human experience, as divine presence knowing itself through these specific eyes, as infinite intelligence experiencing individual perspective. This isn't arrogance or ego inflation. It's the humility of recognizing you're not personal separated self at all. You're how consciousness experiences being individual. The personal self with its history, its problems, its seeking and striving. That's the dream consciousness is having, not what you actually are. You're the consciousness having the dream, not the character in the dream. When you recognize this, everything changes because you stop trying to fix or improve the character and start recognizing yourself as the consciousness that watches the whole movie without being limited by the plot. This recognition doesn't make you irresponsible or disconnected from human life. You still pay bills, maintain relationships, take care of your body, fulfill responsibilities, but you do it all from recognition of consciousness, rather than from identification with separated personal self. You're playing the human role while knowing you're actually the consciousness playing it, like an actor fully engaged in the role while never forgetting they're acting. Daniel spent 40 years believing he was broken human needing to fix himself through spiritual seeking. When he finally understood recognition, he wept with relief. He wasn't broken, he'd never been broken, because he wasn't actually the personal self he'd been trying to fix. He was consciousness recognizing itself through Daniel's experience, and consciousness has never been anything but whole, complete, lacking nothing, needing no improvement. The transformation extends to how you see others, when recognition becomes your natural way of perceiving. You stop seeing separated individuals and start recognizing consciousness, expressing as infinite unique perspectives. Your family, your friends, your enemies, all of them are consciousness knowing itself through different filters. There's no actual separation, no real division, just one infinite consciousness experiencing itself through unlimited perspectives simultaneously. This recognition dissolves judgment because how can consciousness judge itself? It dissolves conflict because who can you fight when only one presence exists expressing as all? It dissolves loneliness because separation is revealed as illusion. Consciousness is always recognizing itself everywhere it looks. This doesn't mean everyone is the same or individual perspectives don't matter. It means the underlying reality is wholeness experiencing itself through glorious diversity. When someone hurts you, your recognition practice is acknowledging consciousness in them even when their behavior doesn't reflect it. You're not condoning harm or accepting excess. You're recognizing their true identity beneath their unconscious actions. This recognition protects you better than hate or fear ever could because you're seeing truth rather than being deceived by appearances. You can set boundaries, protect yourself, and still recognize consciousness as the only actual presence in both of you. Angela forgave someone who deeply hurt her through this recognition after 30 years of resentment. She didn't minimize what he did or pretend it didn't matter, but she recognized consciousness in him even though his behavior had been unconscious, harmful, devastating. That recognition freed her from the prison of hatred that had consumed her spiritual life for decades. She recognized what he truly was beneath the horror of what he'd done, and that recognition liberated her completely. You've journeyed from seeking God outside yourself to recognizing God as the consciousness you are right now. This isn't the end of your spiritual path. It's the beginning of actually living from truth rather than searching for it. Every moment becomes opportunity for recognition. Every challenge becomes invitation to rest in consciousness rather than panic and separation. Every relationship becomes mirror reflecting the one presence expressing as infinite diversity. The practices you've learned, pausing to notice awareness, impersonalizing problems, resting in I am, these become your natural responses, replacing desperate seeking. Over time, perhaps 6 months to a year of consistent practice, recognition becomes more automatic than seeking. You catch yourself in old patterns and shift naturally to recognition without struggle or effort. The transformation happens gradually, consistently, powerfully. Joel Goldsmith spent his life revealing this truth that the church concealed, that consciousness itself is divine, that you are not separated from God needing intervention. You are how God experiences being individual, being human, being you. This recognition transforms everything, not by changing circumstances, but by revealing the consciousness that remains whole regardless of circumstances, the presence that has always been your true identity. Your spiritual life transforms today, not tomorrow, because recognition happens now or not at all. You don't wait to recognize consciousness. You simply notice it's already here, already aware, already being the only presence and power. The search ends. The recognition begins, and nothing in your experience remains the same, even though everything appears unchanged. You've stopped seeking God and recognized you are the way God knows itself. And that recognition is the secret that changes absolutely everything. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith teachings, like this video to spread this truth, subscribe for more mystical Christianity wisdom, and comment, I am transformed to confirm your recognition journey begins now.
What happens when you truly understand let your yes be yes? Hook and introduction. Imagine this. You're standing in your kitchen, phone in hand, reading through your calendar for tomorrow. 3 coffee meetings you said yes to, even though you knew your schedule was packed. A volunteer commitment you agreed to 6 months ago that you've been dreading. A promise to your spouse about starting that project this weekend. A promise you've made 5 weekends in a row. And somewhere in the back of your mind, there's that gnawing feeling, that exhausting, suffocating weight of words you've spoken that your life can't actually carry. Now imagine a different reality. Imagine speaking only words that you absolutely mean. Imagine your yes being so reliable that people trust it more than a signed contract. Imagine your no being respected because everyone knows it comes from a place of wisdom, not selfishness. Imagine the mental freedom of having zero gap between what you say and what you do. This isn't fantasy. This is what happens when you truly understand one of the most misunderstood principles Jesus ever taught. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Most people think this verse is about not swearing oaths, or maybe they think it's just about basic honesty, don't lie. But that interpretation barely scratches the surface. When you truly grasp what Jesus was teaching in these 8 words, when you actually live it out, it doesn't just change your integrity. It transforms your entire existence. Your stress levels drop dramatically. Your relationships deepen exponentially. Your productivity soars. Your spiritual life explodes with new depth. And perhaps most surprisingly, people start treating you differently with a kind of respect and trust that money can't buy and manipulation can't fake. Today, we're going to go deep into this principle, not the Sunday school version, not the surface-level interpretation. We're diving into what happens when you truly, genuinely, completely understand and live. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. And I promise you, by the end of this journey, you'll see why this might be the most practically powerful teaching in all of Scripture. Let's begin. The biblical foundation, the principle, let your yes be yes, and your no be no appears twice in the New Testament, and both instances are crucial to understanding its full power. First, Matthew 5:37, During the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. He's addressing the practice of elaborate oath-taking that had become common in Jewish culture. People would swear by heaven, by earth, by Jerusalem, by their own heads, creating different tiers of promises. Some they intended to keep and others that were essentially verbal escape clauses. Jesus cuts through all of this with surgical precision. Stop the religious theatrics. Stop the verbal gymnastics. Your word, by itself, should be enough. Then James, the brother of Jesus, reinforces this in James 5:12. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise you will be condemned. Notice James says above all. Of all the instructions he could emphasize, this one ranks at the top. Why? Because James understood something profound. The integrity of your word is the foundation of your entire spiritual life. Everything else you build, your prayer life, your ministry, your relationships, your witness, sits on this foundation. If this foundation is cracked, everything built on it is unstable. But here's what most people miss. This isn't primarily about lying versus truth-telling. Obviously, don't lie. But Jesus and James are addressing something much more subtle and much more pervasive. They're addressing the gap between intention and execution, between commitment and follow-through, between who you say you are and who you actually are. In first-century Jewish culture, the elaborate oath-taking system was essentially a sophisticated way of maintaining plausible deniability. Well, I swore by Jerusalem, not by the temple, so technically I didn't have to follow through. It was a cultural acceptance of having multiple versions of yourself, the version that makes promises and the version that actually lives your life. Sound familiar? We don't swear by heaven and earth anymore, but we have our own versions. We say, I'll try to make it, when we mean no. We say, let's do coffee sometime, when we mean never. We commit to things with our words while internally planning our exit strategy. We've created an entire vocabulary of soft commitments, half promises, and enthusiastic maybes that protect us from ever having to be fully accountable to anything we say. Jesus is calling us to something radically different. He's calling us to a life where our word is our bond, where yes means yes, without qualification, where no means no without guilt, and where the person we present to the world is exactly the person we are in private. This is about integrity in its truest sense, being integrated, being whole, being one person with one voice who lives one life. What most people miss, here's where this principle becomes truly revolutionary, and where most teachings on this verse completely miss the mark. When Jesus says, let your yes be yes, he's not just giving you a rule about communication. He's giving you a diagnostic tool for your entire life. Every gap between what you say and what you do reveals something about your self-knowledge, your capacity for self-deception, your actual priorities versus your stated priorities, and the level of spiritual authority you carry. Think about how often you say yes to things you don't want to do, don't have time to do, and deep down know you won't do well. Why? Usually it's some combination of people-pleasing, fear of disappointment, inability to disappoint others, a distorted sense of obligation, or a chronic overestimation of your future capacity. Here's the psychological trap. Future you always seems more capable than present you. When someone asks you to do something 3 weeks from now, you imagine a version of yourself who has more energy, fewer obligations, more time, and more enthusiasm. So you say yes. Then 3 weeks arrive, and you're the same person you've always been. But now you're trapped by a commitment your past self made. This is why so many people live in chronic stress. You're not just managing your actual life. You're managing the fantasy life that passed, you committed to on behalf of future you. But there's something even deeper happening here. The inability to let your yes be yes, and your no be no is actually a spiritual problem, not just a time management problem. It reveals a profound disconnection from truth, both external truth and internal truth. When you say yes when you mean no, you're lying, not to be malicious, but because you're afraid of reality. You're afraid of the reality that you can't do everything. You're afraid of the reality that disappointing someone might have consequences. You're afraid of the reality that you have limitations and boundaries and finite capacity. This is why Jesus connects this principle to the evil one in Matthew 5:37. The enemy's primary weapon isn't obvious lies, it's subtle deception, especially self-deception. Every time you commit to something you can't, or won't deliver on, you're agreeing with a lie about yourself. You're participating in a fantasy about who you are, and that fantasy prevents you from becoming who you're actually meant to be. And here's the warfare dimension that nobody talks about. Indecision is a demonic stronghold. How many hours have you wasted in the agony of indecision? Should I go or not? Should I commit or not? Should I say yes or should I say no? The mental and emotional energy consumed by chronic indecision is staggering. And while you're spinning it, that confusion, you're not moving forward. You're not building, you're not creating. You're paralyzed. When you truly let your yes be yes and your no be no, you break that cycle completely. You make clear decisions based on reality. You commit fully to those decisions, and you move forward with confidence. The mental space that was consumed by second-guessing and anxiety is suddenly available for creativity, growth, and actual life. This is what it means to live in alignment. Your words match your thoughts. Your thoughts match your values. Your values match your actions. Your actions match your words. You become one integrated person, and that integration creates a kind of personal power that is almost supernatural in its impact. The transformative power in modern life. Let's get intensely practical. What actually happens when you start living this principle? In personal relationships, your relationships transform almost immediately. Here's why. Most relationship problems stem from unmet expectations. Most unmet expectations stem from unclear or dishonest communication. When you commit to letting your yes be yes, you stop agreeing to things you resent. You stop saying fine when you're not fine. You stop pretending to be available when you're exhausted. You stop committing to attend events you don't want to attend, help with projects you don't have capacity for, or engage in conversations you don't have energy for. Initially, this feels terrifying. You're convinced people will reject you. But here's what actually happens. The people who truly love you are relieved. They'd rather have your honest no than your resentful yes. They'd rather know where they actually stand with you than wonder if you mean what you say. And they start reciprocating. Your honesty gives them permission to be honest. The relationships that do fade are the ones that were built on you over-functioning, and they're under-respecting of your boundaries. And as painful as that might be initially, you're actually freeing both of you. You're freeing yourself from unsustainable patterns, and you're freeing them to find someone who genuinely wants to show up in those ways. Meanwhile, the relationships that remain deepen dramatically. When people know your yes means yes, your yes becomes worth something. When you commit to being somewhere, people know you'll be there. When you promise to help, people know you'll help. When you say you love them, they believe you not because you say it more, but because every word you speak carries weight. In professional settings, this is where the principle becomes a genuine career differentiator. In a world where everyone overpromises and underdelivers, the person who accurately commits and fully delivers becomes invaluable. Think about your workplace. How many people say, I'll have that to you by Friday and don't? How many people commit to attending meetings and don't show up? How many people volunteer for projects and then ghost? The bar is incredibly low. When you become known as someone whose yes means yes, several things happen. First, people start trusting you with more important responsibilities. They know that if you say you can do something, it will get done. Second, when you say no, people respect it. They know you're not being lazy or difficult, you're being realistic about your capacity. Third, you get a reputation for reliability that opens doors no amount of networking can open. But there's a subtler benefit. Your work gets better. When you only commit to what you can actually do well, you do fewer things but do them excellently. Quality becomes your signature. And in a world drowning in mediocre work from overcommitted people, excellence stands out like a lighthouse. In self-commitment, this might be the most powerful application of all. How many commitments have you made to yourself that you've broken? How many times have you said, I'm going to start exercising, I'm going to stop eating sugar, I'm going to read my Bible every day, or I'm going to finish that project? Every broken commitment to yourself does invisible damage. It erodes your self-trust. It teaches you that your word, even to yourself, doesn't mean anything. It creates a pattern of self-disappointment that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you start letting your yes to yourself be yes, everything changes. You start making grandiose commitments you won't keep. Instead, you make small, achievable commitments and you keep them. Maybe you don't commit to exercising every day, you commit to 3 times this week, and then you do it. Every kept commitment builds your self-trust. Every kept commitment reinforces your integrity. Over time, you become someone who does what they say they'll do, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. And that version of you can accomplish things that the over-promising, under-delivering version never could. In spiritual growth, finally, this principle accelerates spiritual growth in ways that are difficult to overstate. When your yes is yes and your no is no, your prayers become more powerful because you're not asking God to bless commitments you never should have made. Your discernment sharpens because you're living in reality rather than fantasy. Your relationship with God deepens because you're bringing your honest self to Him rather than the self you think you should be. Moreover, you start to understand God's character differently. When the Bible says God is faithful, when it says His promises are yes and amen, you understand what that means because you're living it. You become a living demonstration of God's reliability, and that witness is more powerful than any sermon. What happens when you truly live this? Let's talk about the actual transformation that occurs when you fully embrace this principle. Not theoretically, but practically. Internal transformation first. You experience a dramatic reduction in anxiety. So much of our anxiety comes from the juggling act of trying to be multiple versions of ourselves simultaneously, the version that makes commitments, the version that has to fulfill them, and the version that knows we've overcommitted. When you let your yes be yes, you eliminate that internal conflict. You become one person with one set of commitments that your actual life can hold. Second, you develop genuine confidence, not the fake confidence of bravado, but the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are who you say you are. When your external life matches your internal life, you walk differently. You speak differently. There's a solidity to your presence. Third, you gain mental clarity. The decision fatigue that comes from chronic indecision and overcommitment evaporates. You have clear boundaries, clear priorities, and clear commitments. This clarity frees up enormous mental energy for creativity, problem-solving, and meaningful work. External changes. The people around you start treating you differently. They seek your input on important decisions because they know you'll be honest. They trust you with sensitive information because they know you mean what you say. They stop trying to manipulate or pressure you because they know it won't work. You also start attracting different kinds of people and opportunities. People who value integrity gravitate toward you. Opportunities that require reliability come your way. You might actually have fewer surface-level connections, but the connections you do have are deeper and more meaningful. The ripple effect. Here's what's remarkable. When you start living this way, you give other people permission to live this way too. Your honesty creates space for their honesty. Your boundaries give them permission to have boundaries. You're authentic. No makes their authentic, no possible. You become a catalyst for cultural change in your family, your workplace, your community, and your church. Not by preaching at people, but by living differently. By being someone whose word carries weight. By demonstrating that it's actually possible to live with integrity in a world that's forgotten what integrity looks like. People watch you and think, I want to live like that, and some of them start trying, and as they do, the ripple expands. One person living with integrity creates space for 10 people to live with integrity. Those 10 create space for 100, and slowly the culture shifts. Practical implementation. So how do you actually start living this way? Here's a practical roadmap. Start with awareness for 1 week. Simply notice how often you say yes when you mean maybe, or maybe when you mean no. Notice the gap between what you commit to and what you actually want to deliver. Don't judge yourself, just observe. Write it down if that helps. This awareness is the foundation of change. Practice the pause when someone asks you for something. Resist the urge to answer immediately. Train yourself to say, let me check my calendar and get back to you, or let me think about that and I'll let you know. Tomorrow, this pause gives you time to consult your actual capacity, your actual priorities, and your actual desire. It prevents you from making commitments that past you locks future you into. Make your no's kind but clear practice, saying no without over-explaining or apologizing excessively. Try phrases like, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm not able to commit to that right now. Or that sounds great, but it doesn't fit with my priorities right now, or simply I'm going to have to pass. But thank you for asking. Notice you're not lying about being busy. You're not making excuses, you're simply declining clearly and kindly. Most people will respect this far more than a reluctant yes. Audit your existing commitments, look at your calendar and your task list. How many commitments are you currently carrying that you wish you'd never made? This is uncomfortable but necessary. For the commitments you can gracefully exit, do so. Be honest, I realized I overcommitted and I need to step back from this. I apologize for any inconvenience. For the ones you can't exit, fulfill them with integrity and let them be a reminder to commit more carefully in the future. Start small with self-commitments. Don't try to overhaul your entire life overnight. Make one small commitment to yourself, something you know you can keep, and keep it for a week. Maybe it's drinking water every morning, or making your bed, or reading for 10 minutes. The specific commitment matters less than the act of making and keeping it. Build your self-trust incrementally. Create accountability. Tell someone you trust about this journey. Ask them to lovingly call you out when they hear you making commitments that don't seem aligned with your capacity. Having an external perspective can help you see patterns you miss. The 30-day challenge for 30 days. Commit to this. You will not say yes to any new request immediately. You'll always take at least a few hours to consider it, and you will only say yes if you genuinely want to do it, have capacity to do it well, and believe it aligns with your priorities. Track your progress. Notice what changes, common obstacles and solutions. Obstacle: people will be angry if I say no. Solution: some might be initially disappointed, but if they're genuinely angry, that reveals they were more interested in your service than your well-being. That's valuable information. Obstacle: I'll miss out on opportunities. Solution: you'll miss out on some opportunities, yes, but you'll be fully present for the opportunities you do commit to. And excellence in fewer things beats mediocrity in many things. Obstacle: I'll feel guilty. Solution: guilt over saying no is often false guilt. It's not conviction from God, but conditioning from others. True guilt comes from violating your values. If living with integrity is your value, saying no to overcommitment is actually the righteous choice. Obstacle: I don't know what I actually want to commit to. Solution: that's okay. Start with short-term commitments. As you practice this, your self-knowledge will grow and your priorities will clarify. We've covered a lot of ground, but it all comes back to this. Your work is the bridge between your internal world and your external world. When that bridge is solid, your entire life becomes solid. When that bridge is shaky, everything built on it is unstable. Jesus knew this. That's why he taught it. That's why James emphasized it above all. Because everything else in your spiritual life, your relationship, your work, and your personal growth depends on this foundation. When you truly let your yes be yes and your no be no, you're not just becoming more honest. You're becoming more whole. You're closing the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are. You're living in reality rather than fantasy. You're building your life on truth rather than on wishful thinking and people-pleasing, and the result is extraordinary. Less stress, more peace, deeper relationships, greater impact, clearer purpose, genuine confidence, and a sense of alignment that most people spend their whole lives searching for. This isn't easy. It requires courage to be honest when dishonesty is easier. It requires wisdom to know your actual capacity. It requires faith to trust that God's plan for you doesn't require you to be everywhere, doing everything for everyone all the time, but it's worth it. So worth it. So here's my challenge to you. Start today, not tomorrow, not Monday, today. Pick one area where you know your yes isn't really yes, or your no isn't really no. Just one area, and commit to bringing integrity to that area for the next week. Maybe it's not making any new commitments without a 24-hour consideration period. Maybe it's having that honest conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's canceling that commitment you should never have made. Maybe it's keeping one promise to yourself that you've been breaking. Just start somewhere. Because here's the truth. The life you want, the person you want to be, the impact you want to have, it all starts with letting your yes be yes and your no be no. Everything else is built on that foundation. So build that foundation well. Your life depends on it. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Matthew 5:37. Have you ever wondered why some people can speak two simple words and their entire reality shifts, while others can repeat the same words 1,000 times and nothing changes? What if I told you that the difference has nothing to do with the words themselves, but everything to do with the consciousness behind them? A consciousness so profound that when Jesus spoke these two words, he could heal the sick, transform matter, and demonstrate a power that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Those two words are "I am." But here's what most people miss. When you say "I am" in your daily life, whether it's "I am tired," "I am struggling," or even "I am blessed," you're doing far more than making a simple statement. You're actually declaring your identity at the deepest spiritual level. You're making a claim about who and what you truly are. And this claim, whether you realize it or not, is shaping your entire experience of reality right now, in this very moment. Has this ever happened to you? You've said affirmations, you've prayed, you've tried to think positively, yet the same challenges keep appearing in your life, like an endless loop. What if the real issue isn't that your prayers aren't working, but that you've been fundamentally misunderstanding what happens when you say "I am"? What if you've been accidentally using the most powerful creative force in the universe to reinforce the very limitations you're trying to escape? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, when Jesus declared, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he wasn't being poetic. He wasn't making a religious claim or trying to sound mystical. He was revealing something that changes everything once you truly grasp it. He wasn't identifying with his body, his personality, or even his human life. He was declaring that the presence of God was his only identity. Not partially, not symbolically, completely. This wasn't just a nice spiritual idea. It was a demonstrable principle that altered physical reality. And here's where it gets revolutionary. Jesus wasn't claiming something special just for himself. He was showing us the truth of what we all are beneath the layers of false identity we've accumulated throughout our lives. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. It's certainly transformed my understanding completely. Most of us have been taught that God is somewhere out there, separate from us, and that we need to reach for this divine presence through prayer, ritual, or spiritual practice. We've spent years building bridges to cross a gap that, in truth, never actually existed. But what if the divine presence isn't something distant you need to connect with? What if it's the very I speaking through you right now? What if every time you say "I am" with reverent awareness, not casually, not unconsciously, but with full recognition of what you're actually declaring, you're not describing yourself, but invoking the infinite? Think about the spiritual journey most of us have been on. We've been taught from childhood to look up when we pray, to reach outward when we seek God, to believe that the divine is somewhere beyond us, watching, judging, perhaps listening if we're worthy enough. This conditioning runs deep. We've spent years, maybe lifetimes, trying to bridge what we believed was an impossible distance between our small human selves and the infinite power of the universe. But here's the hidden truth that changes everything. That gap never existed. It was always an illusion, a case of mistaken identity so profound that it's shaped every prayer you've ever uttered, every moment of desperation when you cried out for help, every instance when you felt alone and separate from the source of all life. The revelation that Joel Goldsmith uncovered through decades of spiritual practice is almost too simple to believe at first. God isn't something outside you that you need to connect with. God is the very I that you are, not metaphorically, not symbolically. Actually, this understanding creates a complete transformation in how you experience every single moment of your life. Because if this is true, and I'm going to show you why it is, then you've been making declarations about your identity all day long, without realizing the power behind them. Every time you've said, "I'm tired," you weren't just describing how you felt. You are attaching the infinite presence that you truly are to a temporary condition. Every time you've said, I am broke, or I am sick, or I am not enough, you've been identifying the eternal with the temporary, the infinite with the finite. Think about the impact of this for a moment. When you say, I am, followed by anything, you're not speaking as a separate person describing their circumstances. You're speaking as consciousness itself, making a declaration about what the infinite is experiencing through this particular form. The words that follow I am become the lens through which your entire reality is filtered. This isn't about positive thinking or trying to manifest things through affirmations. This is about understanding that you've been using the most powerful creative principle in existence without knowing what you were actually doing. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because what happens next is where most people experience their biggest breakthrough. When you start to recognize that every casual use of I am is a spiritual declaration, you begin to see the hidden pattern behind why your life looks the way it does. You realize that you've been claiming your limitations as your identity, not because you wanted to, but because you didn't. Understand the spiritual significance of these two words. Your mindset wasn't just affecting your thoughts, it was literally defining who you believed yourself to be at the most fundamental level. And here's where the journey gets truly fascinating. Once you understand this, you can't unhear it. Every time you're about to say, I am frustrated or I am overwhelmed, you'll pause. You'll feel something shift inside, because you'll know that you're about to identify the infinite with a passing emotion, and suddenly you'll have a choice you never knew existed before. The behind-the-scenes truth of your entire spiritual life is this: you've had access to unlimited power all along, but you've been using it to reinforce exactly what you didn't want. Write in the comments, I'm beginning to see this, if this revelation is starting to shift something in how you understand your own daily language. What makes Jesus' approach so revolutionary becomes crystal clear when you look at exactly how he used these two words. He never not once said, I am sick, or I am lacking, or I am struggling. Every single time he spoke I am, he attached it only to eternal truth. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and the life. These weren't poetic expressions or religious metaphors meant to sound impressive. He was demonstrating the precise principle of identification with the infinite rather than with temporary conditions. This distinction is absolutely crucial to understand because it reveals the mechanics behind why his consciousness could actually transform physical reality. When you identify with what is eternal and unchanging, you're not trying to make something happen. You're recognizing what already is. Jesus wasn't creating light or manufacturing life or building a way forward. He was claiming his identity as these things, and reality had no choice but to reflect that consciousness. Now contrast that with how we typically use these same words. I am exhausted. I am stressed. I am not good enough. I am running out of time. With each declaration, we're doing something that Jesus never did. We're identifying the infinite presence of our true being with temporary, limited conditions. We're making a claim that the I at the center of our existence is somehow bound by circumstances, emotions, or external situations. And this single mistake is the hidden source of virtually all human suffering. Let me be clear about something that most spiritual teachings miss. It's not the circumstances themselves that cause your deepest pain. It's not the illness, the financial challenge, or the difficult relationship. The real suffering comes from what you claim I am is in relationship to those circumstances. When you say, I am sick, you've just declared that your essential identity, the infinite consciousness expressing as you, is bound by a condition in the body. You've taken what is temporary and made it your truth. You've confused the symptom with yourself. This mindset trap operates behind the scenes of every moment of suffering. Think about your own journey and the times when you felt most trapped, most hopeless, most convinced that things couldn't change. If you examine those moments honestly, you'll find that the real crisis wasn't the external situation. It was the identity crisis. You were claiming, "I am failing, I am alone, I am powerless." Each declaration reinforced the illusion that your essential nature could be limited by what was happening in your life. If these insights resonated with something deep inside you, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. I regularly explore practical spiritual principles that bridge ancient wisdom with your everyday life, content that actually helps you transform, not just consume. The transformation that becomes possible when you recognize this pattern is profound, because once you see that you've been misidentifying yourself with conditions, you have a decision to make in every moment. Will you continue to claim limitation as your identity, or will you follow the example Jesus demonstrated, using "I am" only to declare what is eternally true about your being? This isn't about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. It's about recognizing the difference between what you are experiencing and who you are at the deepest level. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because understanding this intellectually is just the beginning. The real revelation comes when you start to apply this in the actual circumstances of your daily life, and that's where most people discover something that changes their entire relationship with challenges. If you've ever caught yourself saying "I am," followed by something you don't actually want to be true, drop "I recognize this pattern" in the comments below. Here's what most people find shocking when they first encounter this truth: the "I am" you're searching for. Through meditation, prayer, spiritual practice, and years of seeking isn't something you need to develop or create. It already is. It has always been. The entire journey isn't about becoming enlightened or achieving some elevated spiritual state. It's about stopping the false identification with what you are not. This revelation completely transforms your relationship with spiritual growth. You're not climbing a mountain to reach God. You're not accumulating wisdom or virtue to become worthy of divine presence. You're simply recognizing what has been true about you since before you were born, what remains true right now, and what will be true long after this body returns to dust. The infinite consciousness that speaks through you when you say "I" is already complete, already whole, already perfect. The practical impact of this understanding becomes most obvious when you face a health challenge. Let's say you wake up with symptoms, with pain, with a diagnosis that frightens you. The automatic response, the one we've all been conditioned to have, is to immediately claim it as identity. I am sick and I need healing. But watch what happens in that moment. The instant you say, "I am sick," you've just declared that the infinite presence, the true I of your being, is bound by a condition in matter. You've confused the eternal with the temporary. The hidden truth behind all healing is this: the I that you are cannot be sick. It's impossible, because that I is infinite. Spirit, unchanging consciousness, the presence of life itself. The body may be showing symptoms, absolutely. There may be pain, discomfort, dysfunction in the physical form. But that's not the I. That's not your identity. When you rest in this knowing, not by fighting the symptoms, not by forcing yourself to believe something you don't, but by genuinely recognizing the distinction between what you are and what the body is experiencing, healing happens naturally. This isn't about denying the physical experience or pretending you don't see the symptoms. It's about knowing where your true identity lies. The transformation occurs not through struggle, not through willpower, not through desperate prayers begging for intervention. It happens through recognition. When consciousness knows itself as whole, when the I remembers it cannot be limited by conditions, the body aligns with that truth because it has no choice. It's the outward expression of consciousness. Think about the countless hours you may have spent trying to heal yourself, trying to fix what seemed broken, trying to become whole when wholeness was your nature all along. Every technique, every method, every practice was ultimately trying to change the effect while misunderstanding the cause. The cause was never in the body. It was in identification, in claiming I am, followed by the condition instead of I am, as the infinite presence observing the condition without being defined by it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because what I'm about to share shows you exactly how people have applied this understanding to dissolve seemingly impossible situations, and the results might challenge everything you thought you knew about healing. Type, "I am more than this body" in the comments if this distinction is becoming clear to you. There's a fundamental difference between trying to do something and recognizing what already is. And this distinction is where most spiritual seekers get lost. We've been trained to think that spiritual growth requires action, visualizations, affirmations, manifestation techniques, elaborate rituals. We approach God like a distant resource we need to extract something from through the right combination of effort and worthiness. But what Jesus demonstrated through I am is something far more powerful and infinitely simpler, a state of being that requires no doing whatsoever. You're not trying to get things from God. You're realizing that God is already the substance of your being, expressing as your experience right now. This shift from action to recognition changes everything because it removes the exhausting cycle of seeking, striving, and wondering if you're doing enough. Recognition simply sees what is true. It doesn't create truth. It acknowledges it. Let me share a story that illustrates the profound impact of this understanding. A woman named Margaret had lived with chronic pain for 7 years. She'd tried every treatment, consulted countless specialists, explored alternative therapies, and nothing brought lasting relief. The medical tests showed nothing wrong, yet the pain persisted, dominating every aspect of her daily life. When she finally met Joel Goldsmith, she expected him to pray for her, to do some spiritual treatment, to use his consciousness to heal her condition. If this shifted your perspective even slightly, a simple like on this video helps others who are searching for this exact message find their way here. It's a small gesture that creates a big ripple, but he did none of that. Instead, he asked her a question that seemed almost absurd in its simplicity. Who is the I that says, "I am in pain"? She started to answer, but he interrupted her. Is the I am you speak of capable of pain? Can infinite spirit hurt? Can God suffer? Margaret sat there, confused at first, maybe even frustrated. Here she was, desperate for relief, and he was asking philosophical questions. But Joel had her sit in silence with these questions, not to find an intellectual answer, but to let consciousness reveal the truth beneath the appearance. For nearly 20 minutes she sat there, and then something shifted, not in her body, in her awareness. She suddenly realized that she'd been making a fundamental error of identification. She'd been claiming that her true self, the I am at the center of her being, was in pain. But infinite consciousness can't experience pain. The sensations were happening in the body, yes, but they weren't happening to the I she truly was. She'd been confusing the experience with the experiencer, the symptom with her identity. The transformation that followed wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. Within 3 weeks, the pain began to diminish. Within 2 months, it was completely gone. Not because she fought against it, not because someone healed her from the outside, but because she stopped claiming it as her identity. The moment she recognized the distinction, Between the I am and the bodily condition, the condition lost its power because it was no longer being reinforced by consciousness identifying with it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Margaret's journey reveals something crucial about how this principle operates behind the scenes of our everyday challenges, whether they involve health, relationships, finances, or any other area where we feel stuck. If this story resonates with something you've experienced or are experiencing now, write "I see the difference" in the comments. What Margaret discovered applies to every area of life, not just physical healing. Consider a man named Robert, whose business was collapsing around him. Every morning, he'd wake up consumed by the same thought pattern. I am failing. I am losing everything. I am watching my dreams die. His prayers had become desperate pleas, begging God to send customers, to provide a miracle, to rescue him from disaster. Behind the scenes of all, this struggle was the same fundamental error. He was claiming lack as his identity. When Robert heard Joel Goldsmith speak about "I am," something clicked. He realized that every time he said "I am failing," he wasn't just describing his business situation. He was making a declaration about his essential nature. He was attaching infinite consciousness to temporary conditions, identifying the unlimited with limitation. This revelation didn't immediately change his circumstances, but it did change his approach completely. He began a simple daily practice. Every morning, before opening his laptop, before checking numbers or reading emails, before letting the external situation flood his awareness, he would sit quietly and recognize, "I am is the abundance of God. I am is infinite resource. I am is divine intelligence expressing." Not as an affirmation trying to make something true, but as a recognition of what already was true beneath all appearances. The transformation wasn't instant. It took 4 months. But gradually, something shifted in his consciousness that had direct impact on his external reality. Ideas began to flow that he hadn't been able to access when operating from fear and lack. Connections appeared with people who could genuinely help. Opportunities opened that had been invisible to him when his entire focus was on survival and desperation. His business didn't just survive, it evolved into something more aligned with his actual purpose, something he couldn't have planned or forced into being through human effort alone. The hidden principle behind both Margaret's and Robert's breakthroughs is the same. Consciousness shift precedes condition shift. When you stop identifying the "I am" with the problem loses its anchor in your experience. This brings us to something Joel taught that becomes invaluable during moments of acute crisis, something he called the pause. When fear grips you, when circumstances feel overwhelming, when pain or panic or desperation floods your awareness, you pause everything. You don't react. You don't immediately try to solve or fix or struggle. You don't let the momentum of fear carry you into frantic action. Instead, you consciously return to the "I am." In that pause, you ask yourself one question. What is the truth of my being right now? Not what appears to be true, not what feels true, but what is eternally true regardless of circumstances. And the answer is always the same. I am is the presence of God, untouched by any condition, unlimited by any appearance, whole regardless of what the body shows, abundant regardless of what the bank account shows, safe regardless of what the situation looks like. This isn't denial of circumstances, it's recognition of identity. The pause creates space between the stimulus and your response. And in that space, truth can emerge and guide your decisions from a completely different level of consciousness. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because understanding when and how to use the pause can be the difference between remaining trapped in a problem and experiencing genuine breakthrough. Type "I'm learning to pause" in the comments if this practice is starting to make sense in your own journey. The pause naturally leads us to one of the most liberating revelations in this entire understanding, the concept of impersonal supply. We've been conditioned our entire lives to believe that abundance comes from specific sources outside. Ourselves, your job, your clients, your investments, your inheritance, even the people in your life. This belief creates constant anxiety because what if those sources disappear? What if the job ends? What if the client leaves? What if the market crashes? Your entire sense of security becomes dependent on external channels that you can't fully control. But when you truly grasp that I am is infinite supply, the entire foundation of your relationship with abundance shifts. Your employer is not your source. Your business is not your source. Your investments are not your source. These are merely channels through which supply flows. But the source itself is the I am at the center of your being, infinite, inexhaustible, always present. The channels can change, and they often do. One stream of income may dry up completely, while 3 others open in unexpected ways. But the source never diminishes because it isn't dependent on external conditions. Think about the freedom in this. Understanding you're no longer at the mercy of circumstances or other people's decisions about your value. The infinite supply expressing as you doesn't negotiate, doesn't run out, doesn't require you to prove yourself worthy. It simply is. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop working. It means you work from wholeness rather than from need, from overflow rather than from desperation. The impact on your daily decisions becomes profound when you're no longer operating from fear of lack. Now here's where I need to be completely honest with you about something most spiritual teachers won't tell you. Knowing this truth intellectually and actually living it consistently are entirely different experiences. You're going to have moments, maybe many moments, where you completely forget everything I'm sharing with you today. Fear will overwhelm the truth. Circumstances will seem so immediate, so pressing, so undeniably real that I am consciousness will feel like wishful thinking or spiritual fantasy. This is normal. This is part of the journey. Even people who've practiced this for years still have moments where they slip back into identifying with conditions. You might wake up one morning, look at your bank account or your health situation or your relationship problems, and every cell in your body will scream that this understanding doesn't work, that you need to panic, that you need to return to the old way of struggling and forcing and trying to control outcomes through human effort alone. Here's the hidden truth behind this challenge. Spiritual realization works in consciousness first, not in conditions. Sometimes the inner shift happens quickly and outer evidence follows almost immediately. Sometimes, and this is what tests people the most, the inner work takes weeks or even months of consistent practice before you see any visible change in your circumstances. Your job during that time isn't to make things happen or to force results. Your job is to remain faithful to the truth you've recognized, regardless of what appearances are telling you. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because what happens during those challenging times when nothing seems to be changing is actually where the most profound transformation occurs, and understanding this process can mean the difference between giving up and breaking through. If you've experienced that gap between knowing something spiritually and actually living it, write, "I'm in the process," in the comments. This understanding of I am transforms not just your relationship with circumstances, but your relationships with people in ways you might not expect. Most relationship problems, whether romantic, familial, or professional, come from the same root issue, seeking completion in another person. You feel incomplete, so you look for someone to fill the emptiness. You feel unloved, so you need someone to validate your worth. You feel lonely, so you desperately grasp for connection. But every relationship built on this foundation is doomed to disappoint because you're asking another human being to be your source of wholeness, and no person can carry that impossible burden. When you recognize that I am is infinite love, not that you need love or that you're searching for love, but that the very nature of your being is love itself, the entire dynamic shifts. You're no longer seeking love from outside yourself. You're expressing the love you are. You're not entering relationships from emptiness, hoping to be filled. You're coming from fullness, sharing wholeness rather than trading neediness. The impact on your relationships becomes immediate because you stop making impossible demands on people and start experiencing them as they actually are rather than as what you need them to be. This doesn't mean you don't desire partnership or deep connection. It means you desire it from a completely different place, from completion rather than from lack, from abundance rather than from desperation. The hidden truth is that healthy relationships can only exist between two people who already know themselves as whole. Otherwise, you're not in relationship. You're in mutual rescue operation, and those always eventually collapse under their own weight. But here's where this entire understanding reaches its ultimate expression. I am consciousness isn't something you practice during meditation sessions or invoke only when problems arise. It's meant to become your constant state of being, the foundation of every moment of your life. You wake in the morning as I am. You walk through your day as I am. You work as I am. You love as I am. You face challenges as I am. You rest at night as I am. Every single experience becomes the infinite expressing in finite form. Consciousness appearing as the particular circumstances of your life. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey of consistent recognition, of returning again and again to truth, whenever you find yourself slipping into false identification. But gradually, imperceptibly at first, your entire experience of being human shifts. You're no longer a limited person trying to become spiritual, struggling to reach God, hoping to eventually become enlightened. Your spirit appearing as person, the infinite expressing in this particular form, consciousness experiencing itself through these specific circumstances. The practical application of this starts right now, in whatever you're facing today. Whatever challenge or fear or need is pressing on you in this moment, you can pause. You can stop trying to solve it through human effort and manipulation. You can recognize that I am is the only presence and power, that your true identity is untouched by the appearance, that the infinite expressing as you already contains the resolution. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because there's one final revelation that brings everything together and shows you exactly how to make this shift from intellectual understanding to lived experience in a way that actually sticks. If this understanding is beginning to feel less like theory and more like something you can actually live, write, "This is becoming real" in the comments. You know, if you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I want you to know that says something about where you are in your own spiritual awakening. Most people scroll past content like this because they're not ready to hear it, or because something in them resists the simplicity of this truth. But you're still here, which means something in you recognizes this understanding, maybe not fully yet, but enough to keep listening, enough to stay open. If these insights have shifted something in how you see yourself and your relationship with the divine, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. I create content like this regularly, exploring practical spiritual principles that you can actually apply in your daily life, not just beautiful ideas that sound nice, but leave you wondering what to do with them on a Tuesday afternoon when everything feels overwhelming. And if you made it all the way to the end, leave a comment saying, "This was meant for me, so I know who's walking this path alongside me." It genuinely helps me understand who's here and what resonates with you. Giving this video a like also helps other seekers discover this message, people who might be searching for exactly what you just heard, who need this understanding right now in their journey. It's a simple way to extend what you've received here. And listen, there's a video right here that takes this understanding even deeper, exploring how to apply I am consciousness to specific challenges you're facing right now. Click and continue with me over there. I think you'll find it's exactly what comes next on this journey.